Hi, welcome to Flap, and in this episode we're going to cover automatic continuous focusing with tracking and automatic continuous focusing with the Bird eye system, which has just been released with the OM-1-D. You've all seen pictures of this by now with the pretty little boxes around the bird and around the eye and that sort of thing. I'm not going to do any of that. In all honesty, I'm just too lazy to do that and it's too complex for me to set up. But what I will do in this episode is talk to you about our experiences with it and where I found them good and bad. One of the other episodes that I wasn't a real fan of the quick try I've had of the automatic focus with continuous tracking, and after playing with it a little bit more, I'm still not a fan of it in all honesty. I tend to find that you need areas of good contrast. It doesn't work well on fast moving birds. It loses track quite quickly. And in all honesty, if you're going to just track a slow moving bird, then just put it on a wider focus area and just track it manually. I found it just as easy at the end of the day. So my opinion of that hasn't really changed. Yeah. I must say, when it comes to the automatic tracking with the bird AI function, that's quite a different story. We've been to a number of different places to try it in a number of different conditions, and it seems to work relatively well. The first day that we turned it on, we were down at the Broadwater Spit here, and even before I'd brought the camera up and fully focused, when I was looking through the viewfinder, I could see that it had already locked onto a tern that was flying by and was starting to focus on it. I have to say that the day we went to the seaway, it was a pretty awful day. It was very overcast, very blowy, and it was not very pleasant conditions, but despite that, it did a relatively good job of tracking birds. It tended to lose focus quite quickly if you went from high contrast areas to low contrast areas, so you could get a good track of them in the sky, but as they started to dive down into the water to catch a fish, then it lost track quite quickly. If you try to get birds floating on the water, it also struggled quite badly to do it. It's all white caps as birds and a few other things. So in that sort of scenario, it didn't really work that well. But as I said, they were pretty awful conditions and that would stretch anything. Even trying to take a photo on that day was not an easy task by any stretch of the imagination. But I do have to say that when birds were flying by at a moderate speed to slow speeds, it did lock on, and it locked on very quickly. It also locked onto the eye as well, which I was quite impressed for on a flying bird. We also went out to Goondiwindi Botanical Gardens. I got to say, there was one experience there where it really did work quite well. There was a little lead and flycatcher that was out in a big open area, really an awful place to try and get a focus onto it. Big grassy area, lots of different contrasting because of sun and shade, and trying to get onto it with an automatic focus wasn't possible. Switched over to manual, and even then it was very difficult to try and get a shot of the bird. Reset the camera, put it onto the automatic bird tracking system, waited for the bird to hover again, and it actually locked on quite quickly to the bird. So that was quite impressive for a hovering bird, and particularly that we were struggling to do it manually. Not a good picture, as you will see, but still it was a picture and we were able to capture the shot. And really the picture quality was down to two things, as you would see in the first picture, the conditions, and secondly, I probably didn't have the right settings for that environment either at that particular point. So I have to give the camera good credit for being able to do that. We also tried it out at the University of Queensland Gatton campus, at I think it's Gatley they pronounce it, where there was a lot of plume whistling ducks that were flying in and around, and there was a couple of Australian grebe on the water. Once again, if the bird was coming through the sky at a relatively moderate speed, it tracked quite nicely. Once again, it was able to pick out the eye in some cases as well, which was also quite good. On the water, when the birds were just swimming around gently like grebes do, once again it picked out everything quite nicely, spotted the eye, and you can tell the difference because you suddenly get a small square around the eye. For smaller birds that are in the distance, once again it managed to see them quite nicely. It does struggle to see the eye in most cases, but it does frame the whole bird up quite nicely. If the bird's up in a tree and there's a lot of leaves in the road, it does tend to vary whether it gets a good shot or not. It often will pick the bird out quite nicely, even with a lot of foliage around, and it'll often pick the eye out as well. In honesty, if it hasn't picked it out, I'd have to say that it would be a situation we'd really want to switch over to manual anyway. So in summary, while this may seem a little bit odd, automatic continuous focusing with tracking, I'm not a fan of still. Automatic continuous focusing with bird AI tracking, I got to say I'm rapidly becoming a convert. I think it's quite good, it works quite well in a broad variety of situations. Would I say it works for everything? No. So what I would highly recommend is that you use one of the command functions, just program that in so you can switch between normal shooting and the bird AI. I've actually set up one of the back buttons so I can do it quite quickly without having to take my fingers off the camera or look away, and that's probably a really good option as well. One of the suggestions I would have is that, and it may be in the manual, I haven't come across it yet, is that you don't know if you've actually got the automatic continuous focus with the bird tracking on when you look through your EXIF data as you do in your photo editing. It would just be nice to have that, to be able to see where you've done manual shots and where you've done it with the automatic stuff, just to see, keep an eye on how you're actually progressing as you develop your photography skills. And maybe there's something that Olympus can do in a future hardware update or something that will allow us to track that sort of information as well. So until next time, this is Flap. Happy birding.